Certainly, folks who've been paying attention to the news, probably anywhere in the world, have seen information regarding the horrendous shooting at a Charleston, South Carolina church. 9 victims have been reported killed during the shooting. The suspect, a white man, has been apprehended. Just lots of attention has been focused on this case, seeming like just a really obviously horrendous incident, but really important moment in terms of understanding the reality of racism, white supremacy, and terrorism against black people. I thought it would be phenomenal to get Dr. Welsing on the program, to get her views on this really serious situation, and just some of her initial thoughts and things that she thinks we should be mindful of in discussing all of this. Dr. Welsing, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us this evening. I know this is on really short notice, and you've got all kinds of things happening for your weekend, being recognized for all of your great efforts, and you immediately carved out some time in your schedule to speak with us this evening. We are so glad to hear from you. I guess to get started and maximize time, again, this shooting just taking place within the last 24 hours, what are some of the immediate things that have stood out to you in this event?
Well, certainly I think that there is no doubt that what occurred, came about because of racism, white supremacy. You have a young adult white male saying that he wanted to kill black people, and saying black men rape white women, and that black people were taking over the country. I don't know whether he was making reference to the fact that the country is supposed to now be run by the first black president. And so, without a doubt, this falls within our understanding of racism, white supremacy, certainly. But as I have watched the programs on CNN and other channels, I really found myself, because the people at the church and many other people commenting, political figures and television figures, were talking about how wonderful it was that black and white people were together in the church, and the black and white people were singing "We Shall Overcome" and holding hands and swaying back and forth. And I found myself feeling nauseated, if I really speak the truth, and disgusted. And I just thought that after Ferguson, you have black and white people marching together, and then you have another event. And then you have the events in Baltimore, and you have black people and white people marching together, and everybody's saying how wonderful that people are getting together. And I jotted a note down, and Monday, this is Thursday, and by Monday, everybody will be back again playing their part in the system of racism and white supremacy, either as people who classify themselves as white, or the people that the whites classify as the black people, who are the victims of racism and white supremacy. And I know that people hearing me might say, "Oh, how can she say that? Isn't it wonderful? The people are all holding hands like Martin Luther King wanted them to do." You see, but the very fact that we go from event to event, and I'm certain that because this young man not only killed black people, but, I mean, it's just disgusting that there were 6 black women and 3 black men who were killed, and an 87-year-old black woman was killed. And I said, when are we as black people going to have the level of self-respect and courage to really come out of the slave role? Slave, obey your master, turn the other cheek. Make certain you turn the other cheek and you'll get your reward in heaven. And that's a slave role. We haven't maybe thought about it in those terms. But for example, people never, and there'll be black people coming forward and saying they forgive the shooter, that they forgive and they think this is the thing to do. I mean, that's the cycle of events as far as we are concerned. And I said, no, this is highly incorrect. There was a time period when we didn't have deep insight into the system structure of racism, white supremacy. But then Neely Fuller came along and helped us to understand that we were dealing with a total system structure of white supremacy for the power to maintain the power equation of white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. And Neely Fuller's work helped me to begin understanding and investigating as a system that the system was actually about on this particular planet, because white people who classify themselves as white all over the planet, are fewer than 1/10 of the people on the planet. And they are genetically recessive compared to black people and other people of color, and they can experience genetic annihilation. So once I understood that we were dealing with a system and that the system was actually about people who classify themselves as white, their fear of genetic annihilation. And so we have a choice now. We have a choice as black people. We can go forward, rocking and swaying and singing "We Shall Overcome" when the next event happens, or we can begin to insist that we deal with racism and white supremacy in a non-emotional way and deal with it as it is a war of terrorism, which is what it is, and begin to really have an in-depth understanding of what it is that we are dealing with, not so that we can spend any energy or time hating people who classify themselves as white, but as Neely Fuller has laid out, that the task of the victims of the system of racism and white supremacy is to replace that system of injustice. And after Charleston, South Carolina, I hope there's not a single existing black person on the planet with the killing of these 9 black people inside of a church in Bible study, and the minister is killed right at the Bible study setting with the other people, that we certainly cannot any longer say that, well, somehow things are improving. And so, to me, this is the time when there needs to be absolute insistence that black people not talk about anything else. Instead of talking about, isn't it wonderful that the black and white people were holding hands and singing "We Shall Overcome"? And I think that black people should be saying, out of respect for themselves, because we've had 500 years of this. 500 years. And it's time that we begin to say, no, we need to function with an analysis of why we are doing this over and over again and insist that racism, white supremacy as a total system structure be put on top of the table, because there's nobody that has been represented on TV, television that I have seen that wanted to spend any real time talking about racism, white supremacy. Nobody spends any time talking about it. When President Obama made his remarks, he switched to a discussion of gun control. Well, the prevalence of guns and the increased incidence of people who classify themselves as white purchasing guns is because of the very system of racism, white supremacy. They even named it the Obama effect. When the black man became president, there was a great increase in the purchasing of guns. But the president could not talk about racism. He said our dark past, the nation's dark past. But he could not say racism, white supremacy. He couldn't say it. And nobody else could spend any time. Those people who said, well, white supremacy, they rushed away from it, and now they're beginning to say, well, this young man was probably mentally ill or had some psychological problem. They never say that when young black people are shooting or older black people are shooting and killing. No, those are just bad people and thugs. But they're already beginning to say, well, there must be some reason that he would be disturbed, that he would do something so ghastly. Now, this is in the state where the Civil War began, that had slaves, beat slaves, and did every other horrible thing to enslaved Africans. But here we are at this point not talking about the system of racism, white supremacy. And I say that this is what black people should all be saying, halt. We're not going another step further until we put racism, white supremacy on top of the table to be discussed. And we're not going to talk about anything else other than racism, white supremacy as the power system dynamic that has been structured and maintained by people who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously determined, which consists of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response as conducted simultaneously in all areas of people activity, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, for the ultimate purpose of white genetic survival and preventing white genetic annihilation on planet Earth, a planet in which the overwhelming majority of people are called non-white by white-skinned people, and all of the non-white people are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration compared to the genetic recessive white-skinned people. All of that, which is to say, if racism, white supremacy was not conducted on this particular planet, then there would be white genetic annihilation. And people who classify themselves as white know this, and this is why this young 21-year-old mass murderer in Charleston, South Carolina, said as he was killing the black people, when a young black man tried to, I guess reason with him, this is what one of the reports are saying, that he said, no, I have to do this because all you want to do is rape our women and take control of the country or take our country from us. So, again, I'm saying the only intelligent, self-respecting thing that we can do as black people is to demand through our, what we have to say is to say, no, this is evidence of a system of racism, white supremacy, and we're not going to talk about anything else. And we certainly are not going to be singing, "We Shall Overcome." And it doesn't mean that we're going to be rude and disrespectful to people who classify themselves as white. But we're not going to be led down an emotional rabbit hole, which is where we are taken each time these events happen, because we are not functioning with clarity about what it is that we're dealing with, and the self-respect and the courage to put this clearly on the table. This is not just happenstance. These events that are just falling one right after the other are a result of the fact that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and this is precisely how it expresses itself. Ultimately, the killing of the people that they are fearful can cause white genetic annihilation. So those are my thoughts and those are my sentiments here on June the 18th, 2015, watching another example of someone who classifies himself as white, feeling the necessity to kill innocent black people, and this time it's so up in your face. It's right in the church and right in the Bible study class, and killing the minister and 2 other black males and 6 black females, one of whom was 87 years of age.
Context of white supremacy. Dr. Welsing, you are a 3rd-generation physician, general, and child psychiatrist. What are your thoughts? This suspected white terrorist, Dylan Storm Ralph, him reportedly sitting with the black people that he would ultimately massacre, sitting with them for an hour, sitting right next to the Reverend, so I've been told, Reverend Pinckney, sitting with them for an hour before he begins to start killing. Like, what does that suggest to you?
That he was on a white supremacy mission. You see, so in my view, it's just a variation on the theme of, and the other thing is that when this person was captured, he wasn't beat up by the police. Now just imagine if that had been a black man going into a white church and shooting white people. He probably would be dead. But this young man was handled respectfully and protectively.
Absolutely. This in the same town where Walter Scott, the black male who was shot on video, was not accorded the same protection.
Right, in North Charleston.
Absolutely. I also wanted to make sure I asked as well, because you've been on this program so many times and you have theorized that you think there could be an increase in the shootings and what have you, even Walter Scott, that there could be an increase in this sort of violence against the black people because of the increasing promotion and seeming increasing incidents of particularly black males being engaged in sexual intercourse with white females. The fact that the suspected terrorist in this case, the fact that he's reported to have said, hey, you all are sleeping with our women and taking over, does that further bolster your claim that you think that's driving, accelerating more of these types of incidents?
Well, see, again, you can't play basketball or football or tennis without understanding the game that you're playing. Chess or checkers, you can't play without understanding the game that you are playing. And we have to, if we understand racism, white supremacy, as in my thesis, there's no other thesis out explaining racism, white supremacy, other than my work. And I'm not saying this as a braggart, because I've advertised in the newspaper. Does anybody know, does anybody have a better explanation of this phenomenon that this destructive, deadly phenomenon that we're dealing with? And there's no other explanation out there. And so if we are not functioning with an understanding of exactly and precisely what it is that we're dealing with, which is why Neely Fuller says if you don't understand white supremacy racism, what it is and exactly how it works, everything else that you think you understand will only confuse you. You see, we have to have a thesis. We have to have a narrative of exactly what it is that we're dealing with if we have the intention to solve the problem. If we don't have the intention to solve racism and white supremacy, then we are content with being victims, content with being slaves, and saying it's nothing we can do about it. As a matter of fact, one of the relatives, I think, that was interviewed by Anderson Cooper, the cousin of the minister who was killed and the state's senator, she said, all we can do is just pray. That's the only thing that we can do about it. Well, you know, it's not a slap in the face of anybody's religion. But people who classify themselves as white don't say it's all that they can do is pray when they start carrying out behavior for their genetic survival, whatever that is. All of their efforts in inferiorizing black people, suppressing black people, oppressing black people, they never say that they have to pray in order to do what they need to do. They have analyzed their situation on planet Earth and worked out what is it that they need to do to genetically survive. And they figured out, bottom line, it's genocide to black people because we are fearful of their genetic power. They have the greatest genetic power to cause white genetic annihilation, which is why we have all been taught if you're black, get back, brown, stick around, yellow, mellow, white, right. So as long as we don't have, see, people who, in other words, we are in the position of hoping and praying, and I call it the dunghill of hope, meaning you're not using your brain to analyze the problem. You're hoping that one day people who classify themselves as white will begin to love black people and other people of color. But they can't love people of color if that love is eventually expressed in sex, because that would lead to white genetic annihilation, which is why Dr. Martin Luther King had to be killed. We have to have an analysis of the war that is being systematically waged against us. And as long as we don't want to talk about racism, white supremacy, because we know that people who classify themselves as white will not be happy. So we don't talk about it, and they don't want us to talk about it, and they don't talk about it. So we all just waltz on the black and white dance of racism, white supremacy. We just dance together forward to the next killing. And then we will go through weeping and wailing and praying and swaying and singing, "We shall overcome." And the black people and the white people will hold hands and rock and sway. And so 3 days later, they'll go right back to the practice of deadly racism, white supremacy. And that circular waltz will be unbroken. But that reflects that we don't have respect for ourselves. It reflects that we are really mentally, emotionally disturbed because our self-respect has been annihilated, and racism, white supremacy will go forward. Racism, white supremacy is a system that people who classify themselves as white worked out for their survival. And it doesn't include loving black people. But you look at the TV and you see all the people in Charleston, South Carolina, the home of the Confederacy, where they have insisted that the Confederate flag fly near or over their state house. Even as they're rocking and singing, "We shall overcome," business will go right back to usual because it's their system for their survival. Now, we have an opportunity since Neely Fuller came along and said we're dealing with a system of racism, white supremacy. And then he motivated me to think as a psychiatrist, and I said, the reason that they have to have a system of racism, white supremacy is for their genetic survival because of their genetic reality and their numerical minority status on the planet. So all of that is quite logical, and it makes sense. And the fact that they can't have gun control because the gun is the means by which they keep the black people, the black men in particular, they have to be able to kill black people at will. This is what we keep seeing. And so, again, if we do not stop being emotional, when people are the victims of a war, they don't go into an emotional response. They go into, wait a minute, why is war being waged against us? Let us understand why warfare is being conducted against us. And let us think and reason. What is it that we need to do to prevent ourselves from being destroyed? And first and foremost, we have to cease being emotional and reach for an understanding of why this is happening. Only when we understand why it is happening can we do the effective scientific thing to block it. And you begin by talking about what you understand. So when people who classify themselves as white say, no, we don't think it's racism, then the black response is, well, we are absolutely certain that it is. And this is our definition of what racism, white supremacy is. Finally, we now understand why you have to engage in the kind of behavior you direct against us in economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And then the people who classify themselves as white will say, they finally understand what we're doing. What's going to be our next move? And then the black people will think, what's going to be our next move? But I have said that if black people just begin to perfect self-respect. Our self-respect has been annihilated in the system of racism and white supremacy. That's why the people who classify themselves as white were able to pay so-called black entertainers to start programming their own people to call themselves bitches and hoes and gangsters and thugs and bow wows and freaks, and program black men to not want black women. They have it in their music, and the music is played over and over again until that affects how people end up behaving. And people who classify themselves as white say, these are the lyrics we want you to sing. We don't want you to sing anything about black self-respect or system of racism like Fear of the Black Planet. No, we don't want you doing anything like that. It has to be trashy because we are turning you into trash. And eventually we can have you looking at Scandal and thinking that that's the greatest thing you ever saw, with a black female being portrayed as white men's hoe. Or Empire, and the white people are looking at it and say, this is a planet of the apes. So we are perfectly justified in not giving them education, housing, health care, and eventually destroying them, because this is proof. Just look at it. This is life unworthy of life.
Wow. Context of white supremacy, to that same point, when you encourage black people to not be emotional about this, to use our brain computers so that we can come to an effective solution. What is the significance? I know when I called you earlier, we were both trying to hear what President Obama was going to say about all of this, and you said that you were listening and you didn't hear him use the term racism when he described it, and I was listening and I was looking for the word terrorism. Just what's the importance in terms of the words that we use to talk about this, and not referencing this as a hate crime or any other strange terms, but to be clear and specific that this is racism, white supremacy, which is the highest form of terrorism?
Well, do you see his Attorney General, Eric Holder, the former Attorney General, said the most important thing in the Obama administration. And he, caught hell for it. He said, are we a nation of cowards being unable to talk about racism? Racism is the dynamic that exists on planet Earth. Racism is white supremacy. The thing that is the dynamic, the patterns of perception and logic that are responsible for what we saw just happening in Charleston, South Carolina. Responsible for what we saw in Ferguson. Responsible for what we saw in Staten Island. Responsible for what we saw in Cleveland, where the 12-year-old black male child was killed because he had a play toy. So when the president is unable to, the president doesn't have any problem talking about the rights for women. The president doesn't have any problem talking about protecting the rights of the gay, the lesbians, and the transgenders. The president doesn't have any problem talking about America's responsibility in making certain that the Israelis are secure. But he cannot bring his mouth to say that it is critically important that the lives of black people be protected, and we must begin to focus on the system of racism, white supremacy that has negatively impacted the lives of all black people for the last 500 years. The very fact that he cannot give specific focus to black people indicates that he doesn't, final analysis, have deep respect for himself or black people, and as a consequence, the white people don't respect him. So you have to respect yourself, even if other people disagree with positions that you take. You have to respect yourself if anybody is going to respect you. And so our self-respect has been, like annihilated because we didn't really understand. It's almost like we were at a chessboard and we really didn't understand the game, and so we were constantly, the opponent is moving against us and putting us in a state of check because we don't understand we don't understand the game, and so therefore we can't master playing the game. And so our self-respect was being annihilated following the games that were made during the Civil Rights era. When black people came out of that struggle where they gave their lives and they suffered police dogs and fire hoses and club beatings and death. And they came out of that saying, black is beautiful, black pride, black power, black self-respect. And so the white people knew any people that are talking about self-respect, then you can't hold those people in oppression. And so the system understood we've got to keep these people under our control so we don't end up experiencing white genetic annihilation. And we have white genetic survival. But we can only do it if we can keep our feet on their necks and control what they think about themselves. So we'll go after them through their music. We will have their musicians put trash into their thinking. Make them think of themselves as trash. Because what you do with trash is incinerate it. And so because they don't have a clue, they're just like little children. They don't have a clue as to what is actually happening, which is why they greet each other by saying, hey, what's happening? 1 trillion times a day, hey, what's happening? Hey, what's happening? Because they don't understand what's going on. And they're not thinking clearly because what they are looking for, they're not looking to understand what is happening to them so that they can do something effective about their situation. They are waiting for us as white people to love them. So we can really start handing out a certain number of white women to black men, throwing them completely off guard. And then white men will start killing black men, which is why the killer the other day ended up saying to the black people, you want to rape white women, and you want to take over our country. Words to that effect. So they have got an excellent game going, but the game is the highest level of injustice that's ever been conceived. It's a game of torture and destruction of people of color, and mostly black people, because black people have the greatest genetic potential to cause their genetic annihilation, which is why they designed a system for their genetic survival on this planet. Now, if we're never going to set our emotions aside, it's just like you can't play tennis with just your emotions all over the place. You can't do anything with emotions all over the place. But when people feel helpless, all they have is emotional expression. Like little babies, all they can do is they don't get something or they want something, they start crying for somebody to come and take care of them. So I think it's critically important that we begin to understand at this level what is happening, because nobody is going to come along and save us other than ourselves. But that's why the white people made certain that they gave, once they captured and enslaved the black people, brought them to America, to the different places in the Americas and the Caribbean, part of breaking them in as slaves was to give them a picture of God that was the image of the slave masters. Give them the image of a white God and tell them this is who they're supposed to worship, and this is who they're supposed to seek help from, and this is who they're supposed to seek to love them. And so that was a critically master stroke. And we see it being played out today. 9 black people are killed. 6 black women. 3 black men. A 5-year-old black child in the room had to lay on the floor and pretend that he was dead. And all of that is washed away by some white people and black people holding hands and swaying and singing, "We shall overcome," which is what we learned to do 50 years ago when Dr. Martin Luther King was trying his best to oppose racism, white supremacy, oppose the Vietnam War. You see, but they turned his message around to, "I have a dream. I'm just dreaming." Well, what are you dreaming about? Well, that's not important to even talk about. Dr. Martin Luther King talked about racism. That was what was going on, just like it's what's going on today. Simply modify the exact form. One phase you say they can't go to the toilet, they can't go to a particular store, they can't try on clothes, they can't go to the hotel. Well, change that around and then start giving them drugs and have them highly unemployed. And they will become frustrated and they will start killing each other. Now, we will bring them the drugs and we will bring them the guns so that they can kill each other out of their frustration. We are causing their frustration because we have them unemployed at very high levels. Or we can even add to that, make rules so that if they get guns and buy drugs, then we herd them into our prison system until we reach a point where 70% of the black families are single-parent households and just a mother, and male children don't have father guidance, and they will begin to imitate the mother and put earrings in their ears and have long hair. Eventually they will be females. And then we will pay them high sums of money to put on dresses. Because if we can turn the men into women, then we don't have to worry about white genetic annihilation. Keep them not thinking. Destroy the schools in their community so they won't learn how to read. And then they won't really be able to read books. Because what we do, all of it is in books. But we will program them, watch TV, don't learn how to read. But they won't understand what we are doing, because what they want is for us to love them. We teach them not to love themselves, to love us, and want us to love them. So we basically have them in a trap. But because they want us to love them, they're not thinking about being put in a trap.
Wow. I also wanted to make sure that I asked, because so many times we talk about this on the program all the time. When people think of a racist white supremacist, they think tends to be an older white person, Donald Sterling, Paula Dean, someone in their 80s, Cliven Bundy, and say, oh, you know, these younger white people, they voted for President Obama and they don't have all this prejudice from years ago. Just the fact that the reported shooter in this case, he's 21. This is a very young white person who, as you said, seems like he was on a white supremacist mission to terrorize and massacre black people. What does that say to you, this person being 21?
You're saying, what do young black people think of the person being 21? I'm sorry, I didn't hear all of that.
Just the fact, the age of the suspected white terrorist in this case, he's 21, and how so frequently people talk and say, well, see, these younger white people, they're not racist. They voted for President Obama. They're not like their parents and the older white people who are still racist and carry those type of views. Just what does that say to you, the fact that the suspect in this case is only 21?
Well, it just means that younger people don't understand racism, white supremacy, just like older black people don't understand racism, white supremacy. See, I would say fewer than 1/10 of 1% of black people understand racism, white supremacy, because we're not programmed to do our own thinking. We're programmed to want people who classify themselves as white to love us. So they can get us carried away just by having some kind of magazine that has black men with white women. And so then the men will start thinking that white women love them. And so they won't want to think about racism, white supremacy being a deadly form of oppression. And what we'll give the black women, we will give them scandal. And they can pretend that some president, white man, wants them as a white man passes them from one white man to another white man. Because they, too, want to think that white people love them. So we can keep them in this confusion. We can, as a matter of fact, do anything we want to do with them. Because we have programmed them through giving them a white God. We have programmed them to love us no matter what we do. They won't even see what we're doing to them. It's just like you can feed a little baby poison. Just put it on a cracker. The baby is trusting. The baby needs to be taken care of. So you can make the baby believe anything. What can the baby do?
Do you have any suggestions on ways that black parents or black educators, older black people who might have to explain this event to black children, do you have any suggestions on the best way?
Well, you see, the older black people, that, anybody who's learned how to read, the second step should be, let me understand racism, white supremacy. And like the African proverb says, each one teach one. See, black people teach each other how to dance. We teach all kind of trashy language to each other, trashy jokes. And we never wonder how does a dance move from New York to California in 3 days? Because we teach each other how to dance. That falls under foolishness. But we need to be teaching each other constructive thinking. And we need to be teaching each other when somebody raises a question, hey, what's happening? Then the answer to that is the system of racism, white supremacy that operates in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war. See, just imagine if you had a few black people who begin to understand that's the answer to the question, what's happening? And see, even Louis Armstrong, Satchmo, he's deceased now, great musician. Somebody said, Pops, what's happening? And his answer was, the white man is still in charge. Basically, what's happening is racism, white supremacy. And so instead of not wanting to talk about racism, white supremacy, I say that anybody who doesn't talk about racism, white supremacy is engaging in criminal negligence against the interests of black people. So all black people. See, just like some of these trashy songs that the rap people put out, and, you know, black people know all the words to those songs because that's psychological poison that the system of white supremacy wants in our heads. But we can counter that, and people should seriously think about it. If I could wave a magic wand, black people, all black people, certainly in this area of the world, would realize when somebody says, hey, what's happening, the answer is the system of racism, white supremacy that functions in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war. A system for the purpose of white genetic survival and preventing white genetic annihilation, and in the final analysis necessitates the killing of black men for the genocide of black people. I mean, a group of people who are fearful of another group of people's genetics of necessity have to engage in genocide on the people that they are afraid of, and that's exactly what we see happening. When you are killing the men of a people or warehousing them in prison so that they cannot contribute to the genetic reproductivity of their group, then genocide is being waged on those people. And that is what is happening to us. But again, the answer to, hey, what's happening? The answer is the system, I'm sure you know, or don't you know? The answer to that question is a system of racism, white supremacy that functions in all areas of people activity. That's why we experience the things that is happening to us. That's why we see what's happening in Charleston, South Carolina. And a short time ago, what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. And before that, what happened in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened to Amadou Diallo. And why Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Why Malcolm X was assassinated. Why we were even enslaved. All of that is racism, white supremacy. All of it is tied together.
Absolutely.
And out of our respect for ourselves, it's critical that we begin to understand this ASAP.
Ashe, Ashe. I definitely wanted to make sure I got in for people because they might hear some of the things that you said, particularly when you talked about how just these images of white people coming out and let's pray about this. Folks might hear some of the things that you said and say, hey, Dr. Welsing, you sound like you are some extremist or you're radical, some of the things that you're saying. All of those white people who came out, they are showing that they're not racist, that they don't support this, that this shooter, Dylan Ralph, that he doesn't represent them, and that they just want to make sure that black people know that there are some white people who are not racist who want to help take care of this problem. What would your response be to someone who presented that argument?
Well, there has never been a day, there's never been a week, there's never been a month, there's never been a year in the last 500 years when racism, white supremacy has not been happening 24/7. See, racism, white supremacy is not a figment of our imagination. Just like our being enslaved is not a figment of our imagination. That was what black people experienced. Just like black men being warehoused in prison is not a figment of our imagination. All the frustration of black male children that leads them to be fighting with each other and depressed is related to not having fathers, because the system of racism has said, no, you are not going to have jobs, and so you're going to then be forced to sell drugs or shoot and kill, and then I'm going to put you in prison with disparate sentencing. So I'm saying, as we speak, racism, white supremacy is being practiced. Anybody have a doubt? Just turn on your television, and what you see is white, 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 white. White, 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 white. Well, there's a black man bucking his eyes and acting crazy. White, 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 white. Or, turn on C-SPAN and look at who makes the rules and regulations in the Congress. Or get your next newspaper and see how the first black president is talked about. All of that's going on as we speak. And there will be another killing.
Absolutely.
Before the month is over.
Perhaps before the day is out, unfortunately. I just wanted to get in as well really quick also. What is your response, particularly, given so many of the incidents where black people with no suspicion, no probable cause, have been choked, killed, harmed, pummeled over the past centuries, but certainly highlighted over the last year or so. Some of the more recent reports, they're saying that some of the white people that knew the suspected white terrorist, Dylan Storm Ralph, that he had been planning.
Wait, say that again. Said some of the white people knew what?
Some of the white people who knew the suspected terrorist, Dylan Storm Ralph, they're saying that he had been talking about doing this sort of thing for a long time. Like they're talking to some of his white roommates and they're saying that, he told racist jokes and he made it very clear his belief in and practice of white supremacy, and that he had been talking about committing violence and even killing black people for a long time. Just what are your thoughts, the fact that he could be talking about this publicly? He's not harassed. He doesn't have Homeland Security on his doorstep. His name is not on a registry somewhere, that he could do this sort of thing, and and you'd already talked about he can be taken into custody without a scratch.
Well, again, all of this, he's white. An American University professor told me that Dr. Welsing, female white, on all social occasions when white people are together and no black people are around, they're talking negatively about black people. And the assumption is that every white person present is in agreement. That's the way they talk. And I said, I understand you all are just talking code about the maintenance of racism, white supremacy, where black people are called the bad people. Black people are called the criminals. This young man is going to be said, well, he was disturbed and he was unhappy. You see, but his friends said, he was making racial jokes and his white friends were listening to him. And everybody was having a little laugh. They just didn't know that he was the one who would be carrying out what he talked about. But again, what do the people who call themselves white supremacists, what do they talk about? Do you have racial remarks against black people all on the internet? Does that happen? Mr. Jefferson?
Absolutely. Tons of, I didn't think I needed to answer, but certainly against President Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama. It's been, we've been pointing out, it's been at least 3, 4, I think 5 different police departments where they have been making the same sort of racist jokes about black people, including the Ferguson Police Department.
You see, so again, and as we speak, the system is not going to stop. The system didn't stop following the murder of the little black girls in church in Birmingham, Alabama. The system has never stopped. The system doesn't stop. The system is for white genetic survival. So it can't stop. It's just a pause while we pretend that we like black people. So they will be focusing on how much we love them as opposed to what we are now doing to them. The unemployment for black people is going to stay the same. The failed schools are going to stay the same. They will be there in September. The gentrification, moving black people out of urban centers, that will be there. Efforts will be made to curtail the black vote. So the system is continuous. The system has not stopped, has it, since the days of former slavery. Black people are still the odd people out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Extremely pretend that they care about black people. Powerful point. Powerful point. I think they have a lot of practice with that every time. There's so many of these incidents where they get so many opportunities. The assassination of Dr. King, Katrina, Ferguson, Tamir Rice. There's so many opportunities to pretend that you care about black people, all the while black people just continue to be pummeled. Before we let you exit, just your opinion, General Child Psychiatrist, does it mean anything? They reported that the suspect, Mr. Ralph, that he was a pill popper and that he took Xanax. Does that mean anything to you?
Well, you see, there are many people who use drugs and take pills. You can even say misuse drugs, but he wasn't under the influence of drugs when he went into that church and sat very calmly and knew how to pretend to the people that he was interested in what they were saying. And then pull out his gun and kill 9 and walk away and get in his car and drive away. Did he need to be under the influence of drugs to say that he wanted to kill black people? Did he need to be under the influence of drugs to say that all black men want are to rape white women? Since that has been said since black people were brought here. So again, see, I say the critical factors are, see, we have been, if you don't like yourself, then people can tell you anything. And you'll believe it. Because you don't have confidence in yourself. And racism, white supremacy has worked hard at making us not have confidence in ourselves because we turn on the TV every morning and get a big dose of racism, white supremacy. For the most part, we don't see large numbers of black people speaking intelligently. See, there are a lot of black people that are being interviewed in Charleston, South Carolina. They're making intelligent comments, but we don't see that every day on the TV. And all the black women that we see on TV have long, straight hair that they buy at the store, indicating that they wish they were white. And maybe that's the only way that the white people will hire them. You have to look like you want to be white. So it's not anything, it's not so therefore we should attack ourselves. No, we should just understand, like, if we decided that we wanted to learn how to play chess. So it's like, what is this game? How is it played? What are the rules? What are the goal objectives? And so